Hello, my name is Mitch and I draw Blood Force, and we're back for some more Magnus. If you stuck around for the entirety of the first Magnus video, good for you. that one ran a fair bit longer than I expected. That's what happens when you cram a shit ton of story into a single book. So before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to support me a little bit as an artist, what you can do is in the description here for this video, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you go subscribe there, that'll give you access to the Blood Force pages and comics. It'll also give you access to these videos before they make it to YouTube, usually a week or so in advance. Also, if you like, you can go over to my Instagram and commission some artwork from me there, because those commissions are now open. So, we're back with more Valiant. This is for July of 1991, which does make it a couple of months after the first issue, which came out in May, but Shooter would keep it on schedule after that, at least. So we're continuing the story from last issue. So if you recall, Magnus Robot Fighter is set in the year 4000. Magnus himself is the defender of North Am against rogue robots. He's been trained by 1A to be the pinnacle of physical perfection, to the point where he can destroy robots with his bare hands. And that's important because robots in the year 4000 are everywhere. Everything is mechanized. If you're a member of the elite, I suppose, maybe even just like middle or upper class, I'm not quite sure, then you live a life of luxury and everything is taken care of for you by robots. Unfortunately, there was an event recently where a pulse went out that triggered free will among 10 million robots. And of course, these robots now are going to want to have their own say about their own destiny. They don't want to be enslaved to the human race. They want to determine their own future, even if that means waging war on the humans in order to do it. And Magnus himself had experienced a bit of a crisis of faith, where his assurance in his role as the destroyer of robots has kind of wavered. Now he's starting to wonder if maybe robots with free will are in fact living beings, basically. And we almost got to the point where Magnus might be able to negotiate with the leader of the free will robs, O1X. However, the backup he'd called in just in case couldn't wait for his order, and they all busted in and kicked off the confrontation. And while the commander for that particular mission was kind of patting himself on the back for killing thousands of robots, thousands of robots is a drop in the bucket when we're talking about 10 million. And now that is a current problem. So this is, if we recall from the end of issue 1, Steel Nation Chapter 2, now it's war. I'm down. So let's get into it. First of all, we'll start with the cover. This is by Art Nichols, of course. And it's a pretty good cover in terms of composition, where everything ends up kind of pointing at Magnus. And you get a nice dynamic shot with him about to plummet to his death, assumedly. These aren't the most detailed buildings in the background, but like, who's looking at the buildings in the background? Except for me, right? Go tank! I have no idea what that is, but alright. Alright, so we're opening things up, and Magnus is going to work. Again, we get a first page splash, which we got in the first issue, and I was a little surprised at. I don't know, I'm not sure if that continues. I don't think so. Well, evidently I'm wrong. That is how it's done. So, if this is a Jim Shooter requirement, then it is a tried and true one. That is how you tend to get attention in comics right away for somebody picking up an issue off the rack. Okay, I open up the cover. What's the first image? Well, the first image is Magnus beating a robot to shreds. It's not a bad first image. It does, unfortunately, accent the awful Valiant coloring with this shadow here. I don't like that. Valiant coloring often looks like it's done in pencil crayon or maybe even marker. I would have much rather had the old 4-color system, to be honest. So, kicking things off, Magnus is in the waterworks of the city, and he is defending it from these rogue robots. There's not too many left. As we can see here, the battle's been going on for a while. We're only here for the end of it. And it seems like Magnus is in peril. That doesn't last for very long, though, as he kicks the one robot through the wall and smashes the other two together. And it looks fairly convincing. I'm not familiar with Art Nichols' art beyond Magnus #1. It's pretty good, I gotta say. Better than I was expecting. Although, again, this is the Valiant Superhero launch title. So I guess they wanted to get one of their best guys on it. So, the Riot Robs and the, I guess essentially the police, are able to catch up after this and help Magnus get his foot out from where it's stuck in the wall. And Magnus almost collapses because he hasn't slept in days. This is what he's been doing the entire time. He's just been destroying robots now that the conflict has been kicked off. And they mention later on that the police these days aren't much more than, security guards and cheerleaders, essentially. And I had kind of forgotten this particular cheerleader squad that came to Magnus's aid. Remember, this is 1991. You can have gender-specific uniforms at this time. So, one of the cheerleaders is going to fly Magnus home so that he can get some rest. He does make mention that it's a little strange that there's a storm coming, and it turns out the robots actually destroyed the weather control the night previous. And we get a brief rundown on what's been happening since the end of the last issue. This morning we doubled security at key military installations, the power complex, and of course Central Rob, so Robot Central Hub. But we're running out of guard robs. We have to use them in teams because there's no way to tell rogues from normal units. So of course, with the free will robots looking exactly the same as the regular robots, they can all hide in plain sight and sabotage whatever installation they want in defense of their goal, which is robot freedom, right? All right, so Magnus has to be dropped off at this Mile Spire, they call it, because he wants to go to a lab to check out something. And the cheerleader is like, nope, taking you home to get some rest. And he's like, no, you're not. And he dips out of there. And just, I guess this is how Magnus just kind of leaves when he's done. He just leaps off of cars or buildings. So he's going to go to this central laboratory, and because he heard that a couple of rogues got delivered here to be tested on. And he's going to find out what exactly they've found out. So first thing he wants to find out is what exactly caused a robot to have free will. And they can't answer that. And Magnus does have the chip in his head that allows him to see robot communications, but even that's not helping him. This is the head scientist. She comes up again now and then. And then Magnus's attention turns to an imprisoned robot that is being, it's being disassembled and dissected while it's still functioning. So because they're looking to see if they can find some identifying energy signature or signal or something. And of course, this is basically torturing the robot. And that's a problem for Magnus. Because as I said, he's having sort of a crisis of conscience. And just capturing robots and torturing them to death, it doesn't sit right with him. And it doesn't sit right with LA5 here, who's another rogue robot. So, while this one here that's been captured begs for death, basically, LA5 fulfills its wishes. And then immediately kills itself, because he refuses to be... there's the possibility that they could find what they're looking for a signal or an energy source, and either find a way to reverse the pulse that gave everybody free will, or maybe just identify them. Because even that would be super dangerous for robots. And as he's going, the robot gives them a pretty singular curse. May you suffocate in your own waste product. Squee! So basically hoping that they all just choke on their own shit. And while Magnus is dealing with that, it turns out that Legia is well enough to bother him. Robot shows up with a little broadcast from Legia. Legia's in the hospital from the end of the last issue, where she got pretty heavily injured, to the point where there was concern for whether Leisha would actually end up dying. And it turns out that's not the case. Magnus is happy because he doesn't realize how useless Leisha is. Or maybe he's okay with it. I mean, Leisha is basically the equivalent of a socialite in this. Her dad's the senator, and she has endless luxury at her fingertips. So she's a complete ditz. She has no real drive. She has no real ambitions, other than what I'm sure her dad probably sets in front of her. And she's already dating Magnus, who's the hero of Northam. So, I mean, like, she's already winning, right? So Magnus rushes to Leisha's side, and she immediately goes, wait, who's this woman who I'm seeing in your thoughts? Because Leisha is slightly telepathic. And he's like, what? Nobody. It's a scientist. I was talking to a scientist. And Leisha, of course, gets super jealous because she's a woman. That's how the women's get. So we're going to switch now to a scene that's not quite so ditzy. This is in the Cape Henry area ground level. And the ground level is where all the poor hang out, in case you've forgotten. That's the Goff level. And here we have O1X, who's the leader of the Free Will Robs. And this particular Rob is rushing to give him some updates. But he's in the middle of overseeing an operation. So we've got a robot here who was horribly mangled by having to deal with Magnus. And he's dying, basically. And they're trying to see if they can repair him, but the difficulty is that they don't know what caused free will. So if they fuck with his CPU, they might accidentally just turn him back into a regular slave robot. And actually, that's exactly what they end up doing. They are able to repair him, but when he snaps out of it, he just starts talking like a regular Rob. So this is not my appointed duty station. Please advise me of my whereabouts and the reason for my presence here. And O1X clenches his fists and goes, "Whoa." And of course, these are the very simplistic designs for robots. I feel like I should probably bring it up again. They do mention a reason for it in here, which is basically so that humans continue to think of them as appliances and robots, and they don't start to anthropomorphize them. If they look like, overgrown toasters, then that's what you think of them as. It's as good a reason as any. I mean, really, it's just a holdover from 60s sci-fi where everything looked fucking goofy. But that's not a bad excuse for things to be the way they are. So the robot that was going to report stuff to O1X, he continues to follow him out and just kind of harangue him a little bit. And he's like, "Not now. This has been a tough day. All right, we're gonna have to move our entire operation here because that robot, he sent out a signal immediately asking for assistance. So the guard robs are gonna be here pretty quick. So we gotta just bolt." And the other robot here points out that he noticed that robot was twitching while it was a free will rob, and then once it turned off, it stopped. And that's the tell for free will robs, is that they have this tremor constantly that isn't normally noticeable to humans, and maybe not even to robots if they're not looking at it for it, but Magnus will notice, because that's Magnus's job. Speaking of Magnus, we now cut to a fancy schmancy dinner party featuring Magnus, where he's sitting in. Leisha is all better from the hospital. He's sitting here with Senator Klain. I believe the president is here as well. And Magnus is stuck wearing his formal duds, which is a tuxedo with a cape. And you can tell he's not having it. He doesn't even get to wear a skirt. He's very unhappy. Like, if you're going to make a guy go out in fancy dress, at least give him a ball gown or something so he can get some air. It's like he shaved his legs for nothing. And he's having to sit through this dinner and basically show off how much of a hero he is, and show off his steel hard hands through mental concentration. And the woman here is very impressed. Magnus this is just a matter of course for him. This is what being a celebrity means, unfortunately. And Leisha gets all worked up about this robot here, W23, who gets featured a little bit here. And she's freaked out because she thinks they're one of the rogue robots. Particularly, she recognizes the chess designation W23. Her father points out, there's plenty of waiters. There's thousands of waiters with the W23 designation. This isn't the one. And we got a little bit of character development for Leisha here, actually, because having been jacked up by a bunch of rogue robots, she now just wants to see them all get smashed, which is something. You know, she didn't really have much of anything going on before, so her actually caring about something, yeah, no, I'm down with that. And one of the senators here wants to toast to Magnus continually smashing robots. Magnus is continuing to have his crisis of conscience. He doesn't really want to celebrate the fact that he's destroying anything anymore. And again, W23 comes up behind him with a plate hiding their hand. And Leisha warns him again, and turns out it actually is one of the rogue Robs trying to assassinate Magnus. So Magnus knocks the plate out of its hand and is about to, go to work, but hesitates because he's not sure if he should be doing that anymore. One of the other waiters is also a rogue Rob and jumps in the way of one of the guard Robs here to allow it to escape and gets destroyed immediately. And then W23 jumps out the window. And Leisha is a little disbelieving of the fact that she actually let it go. And there's a rift now between Leisha and Magnus. And again, this is character development. That's okay. Magnus goes back to his quarters. His usual butler Rob, I suppose, has been switched off because W23 has infiltrated Magnus's living space. And we haven't had a whole lot of plot development up until now. There's largely been recaps. There's been recaps and there's been sort of telling you the state of the Union now, where it's constant tension. Things haven't boiled over just yet, but they could at any minute. So Magnus and W23 are going to have a sit down. And W23 is fascinated about the fact that Magnus won't kill it. He keeps giving it opportunities to escape or explain itself or something. And that's just not, for one thing, it's not what the Rogue Robs are saying about the humans in general, but Magnus in particular should be smashing him without a thought, right? And W23 is still in kind of a newlywed state with its altered consciousness. So, it actually finds beauty in a flower, that kind of thing. But that also is a bit of a plot development thing, because Magnus notices that the flower is shaking a bit when W23 is holding it, because W23 is vibrating, because it's sentient, right? And that's what they do. And now that Magnus thinks about it, all of the rogue Robs he's come in contact with up until this point have that weird little tremor, and he just didn't notice it up until now. And regular Robs don't. So now Magnus knows about the tell, which is actually a problem. It seems like it would be an advantage, but Magnus is already quick enough that if he were to get attacked by a rogue Rob, it's not going to be able to do any kind of damage to him, really. His reflexes are too fast for that. And so this doesn't give him a huge advantage, other than he can tell when they're being covert. I get that is actually a pretty good one. But the problem is that if Magnus has noticed it, chances are OX1 has noticed it, or will soon. And of course, OX1 already has. And Magnus points out here, if it's O1X. I keep getting it wrong. If O1X even suspects that a distinguishing characteristic exists, he may gamble everything on an all-out assault rather than wait around to be annihilated. So instead of it being the key to victory for the humans, it may just accelerate the entire war to the boiling point, which is an interesting monkey wrench to throw into things. It's not the kind of thing I would necessarily think of. And right around when he realizes that, Leisha shows up at his quarters, which means it's time for W23 to get the fuck out of there. And Leisha can fall in his arms and be all like, "Oh, don't you love me? Why'd you leave? Why are your thoughts still closed to me?" And she's calling out Magnus for thinking about somebody else. And it's like, is it another woman? Because again, she's a woman, so she gets jealous. That's how it works. And Leisha leaves and doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. So again, interesting character development. And as she leaves, robots attack. This isn't particularly impressive. This is the kind of thing, because Art Nichols was pretty good about putting some detail in the background for issue 1. It kind of looks like he didn't have the time to do that in this case. Or it could just be a case of didn't want to confuse all these robots, all that detail with any kind of detail on these buildings. It still looks, you know, it doesn't look great. And it could have looked a lot better, unfortunately. But Magnus smashes his way through this attack squad. And it's just smash, 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 smash. And it looks pretty good, actually. We're not going into any kind of detail on the backgrounds, but that doesn't mean we're skipping on the detail on the smashing. There is a lot of it, too. Like all the little bits of shrapnel flying off. That's, you know, in here as well. Pulling out circuits. Just coming to pieces all over him. He reactivates his little manservant droid. Tells him to alert Central Rob and report this. And I guess he's got like a full-size aquarium in his house. I didn't really notice. Which gets broken and shoves him out the window here, basically. So he's got to hang on to the balcony for dear life. And then we get the shot from the cover. Essentially, boiled down. This is a bit more impressive. Certainly. Plus, he's got his skirt on. That's just appropriate. So, and here it's just, you know, it's just part of the story, which is kind of interesting. Magnus, of course, as on the cover, gets knocked off the balcony, starts to fall off, but there's one of these, like, traffic control robots flying nearby. He's able to grab a hold of it and sort of direct it so it smashes back into the building. I guess the buildings are all kind of made of glass or something like that. They don't seem to be particularly sturdy. And that takes him into the kind of this atrium here. And the robots are able to track him down pretty quickly. And it turns out O1X is in the middle of all of this, which doesn't seem wise, considering he's more of a figurehead kind of deal, as well as being the mastermind. So, like, you can't really risk having him in the field, but it does actually lead to some interesting plot twists. Magnus was able to hide for a second, and swoop down, and get a hold of O1X. And O1X is saying, what are you guys waiting for? Shoot him immediately. Even if I die, if we get rid of Magnus, we win anyway. Except Magnus is having his little manservant buddy, V12, okay, so that's the name, pull out a power conduit, and he's about to drop it in the water. So he's going to destroy all these robots anyway. So we're in a bit of a standoff. And Magnus actually wants to use this opportunity to try and talk with O1X, which is how the last issue also ended. But O1X is not as willing to listen to reason as he was an issue ago, because things have changed. You know, they can't necessarily live in hiding anymore, so they have to win. There is no tie scenario. You know, so he's saying, you know, kill us or die. That's all you got. They open fire. Magnus throws a plant at him. And I believe just kind of, yeah, they all kind of flood down to the lobby here and then out into the golf level. Again, not impressive for a large panel. At least we got all the robots and nothing looks egregious. You know, it's all fine. It's just, it could have stood more detail. But, you know, they probably didn't have time for that. This is already a month late, as we recall. So, after Magnus is triumphant, the guard robs go and place Magnus under arrest. Because Magnus had O1X, and he let him walk. And you can't do that. So, they order him to surrender. Magnus goes, no, I'm just going to leave. You guys sort out amongst yourself. He says, seize him, so he just smashes. He's like, what are you going to do? You can't fight, and I can destroy every one of your guys that can. So just fuck off. Leave me alone. And so they do. they let him go. And that's it for issue number 2. Not as much story, I suppose, as the first one, but no less satisfying for it, I think. We did get our big confrontation between Magnus and a bunch of assassin droids, essentially. And next issue, we're going to have Chapter 3, The Price of Betrayal. And they've all had their own little title here, which I keep forgetting to mention. So the first one was Protector. You see where it's going? This issue here, Soldier. Not the same thing. Next issue, Traitor. So again, very interesting. I have read issue 3. It does get better. So yeah, that does it for Magnus number 2. Pretty good. Again, doesn't quite stand up to the first one, but there's enough there that you want to see where it's going from here. And you know things are going to boil over very, very soon. And actually, next issue is when that really starts to kind of kick in a high gear. And, you know, I do end up talking about the story in these an awful lot. It's a little strange. It's a bit of a departure. Like, I'd talk about the art if I could, but, like, there's nothing really to say. It's all decent. Like, there's no problems, is the thing. That's the thing with Image. You get a bunch of great, you get a bunch of fucking awful. This is completely middle ground. Like, there's no problems with shadow or perspective here, and that's the case for the entire issue. There's a few pages at the end where they were probably rushing to get it out, where backgrounds just kind of disappear, or they become extremely simplistic. But that's how it goes sometimes, and you still get your Magnus robot fighter action. So there's not a lot for me to say about it one way or the other, because, you know, like I said, there's nothing egregious and there's nothing awesome. It just moves the story. Which is good, because the story's pretty good so far. And I'm looking forward to getting to issue 3 in the next video. But like I said, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Follow the link to my Patreon and subscribe there. That'll give you access to all the Blood Force stuff, all the pages, and the finished comics, as well as these videos before they get to YouTube, usually a week or so in advance. And also, head on over to my Instagram, because commissions are now open there. All right, so thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.